get some perspectives on that issue with Adebayo Oluwake, who, as you've seen there, is a global affairs analyst. Thank you for joining us this morning. So on the one hand is the coup, the reasons given, and the ECOWAS. There are concerns about whether or not this is going to spread one way or the other into Nigeria, but perhaps a general understanding of exactly what is happening. Did this coup come to you as a surprise, given what's been happening before now?
Thank you for having me, and good morning. Yes, the coup came to me as a surprise because when President Bazoum was initially elected, there were strong rumors that a coup had taken place. There were diplomatic efforts at the time, and I remember the regime of President Buhari issued a very stern warning to the armed forces of Niger. And then President Bazoum was able to be sworn in. So one would have thought that having overcome that initial threat, that his administration would have taken measures to secure his presidency. But obviously that hasn't happened. And now we have this situation on our hands, which is an extremely worrisome situation. If I just quickly explain why it's extremely worrisome. First of all, Niger is part of the coalition in the multinational joint task force comprising Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger itself. And this coalition has successfully contained Boko Haram and ISWAP in the Lake Chad region. Then, of course, Niger borders Mali to the west. Mali has had a strong jihadi insurrection of its own, and I don't want to go into all that has happened in Mali because a lot of people are aware of the challenges and the expulsion of French forces, the expulsion of UN peacekeeping forces, and the preparation of Wagner PMC of Russia to fully take over security in Mali. And then Niger also is the buffer for Nigeria against Libya. So we know that Libya is totally unstable. The government of Libya in Tripoli doesn't have sovereignty over all of its territory. And therefore, Niger occupies a significant geopolitical index in our security calculus. And lastly, globally, Niger produces 5% of global uranium needs. Last year, it produced 2,020 metric tons, which is exactly 5% of total global production. And uranium, as you know, is used for nuclear energy or even for the production of atomic weapons. So this is the security risk that Niger constitutes. And the coup that has happened there is a very, very big threat to the entire region. I believe ECOWAS under President Tinubu has taken a very resolute position. And I think this is the way to go. Well, there are certain things they need to consider.
Yeah, perhaps we'll be able to get to those. But then, I mean, raising the issue, the economic angle that you raised now, there are those who are raising concerns about Niger, the coup that happened here, being more of an international, being of more international significance between certain world powers. France, Russia have been mentioned, among others. How significant is that from your own calculation?
I believe strongly that, yes, I mean, that is a factor, and we can have some discussion on that. But the fact remains that there are internal problems within Niger. And it is this internal problem that the external forces are capitalizing on. Let's recall that the United States and France have military bases inside of Niger. Particularly the drones used by the US Air Force and to some extent the French Air Force to monitor developments in the Sahel are all located in Niger. And there are roughly about a battalion strength each of French and US forces stationed in the country. So that already gives you the international dimension that you're alluding to. And now, talking about the possible involvement of relationship with Russia, you would know that in Mali, the expulsion of French forces, largely because of frustration by Malian citizens that France has not done anything to stop the jihadi insurrection there, has seen Mali tilting towards Russia. And that has paved the way for PMC Wagner to be deployed. Burkina Faso as well, that has also suffered an insurgency, has also had deployments of PMC Wagner groups. So there are those who speculate that what is probably happening in Niger could also have been instigated, even though we know that Brigadier General Chiani, the commander of the presidential guards who staged this coup, has never been on good terms with President Bazoum. The problem is how come President Bazoum left him in that position for so long. But clearly, there are a lot of external influences, as you have noted.
And out to the elephant in the room, is there any cause for concern, worry, anxiety for Nigeria and Nigerians by extension?
I think that at the moment, Niger does not constitute a threat to Nigeria. The military in Niger is just 12,000. That's about 12 battalions. It's just a little over a division. The Air Force, which might be the deciding factor here, they have only 2 fighter aircraft, 9 helicopters, and maybe 1 or 2 surveillance aircraft. So militarily, Niger is not a threat to Nigeria. The problem arises on how we respond to what is happening in Niger. ECOWAS has taken a very firm position, which is understandable, but I personally believe that ECOWAS should perhaps only use the military to apply pressure rather than to actually deploy the military for combat. Without any doubt, ECOWAS will militarily overcome Niger. But the problem is that in the process, one, you could lose the life of President Bazoum, and secondly, you could create something that we cannot control. Because Niger is critical to the multinational joint task force securing the Lake Chad. Niger is also critical as a buffer for Nigeria from jihadi elements from the western side, northwest, which is Mali. And then Niger is critical as a buffer against what is happening in Libya. So for these reasons, I believe that ECOWAS, while I support entirely the position of ECOWAS and that of its chairperson, President Tinubu, I think they have to be very careful.
You know that the challenge here is that Nigeria as a country has its own fair share of challenges which President Tinubu needs to pay attention to naturally. And there is that bit happening in Niger, having to coordinate ECOWAS. Yes, resolutions have been made. Again, there are questions as to just how effective all these sanctions and bans are. Perhaps we'll take that up because we've seen how it played out in Russia, all of the bans and sanctions, yet the war is still on. But let me step back a bit and ask, have we been able to critically interrogate why coups have become fashionable in this part of the world, really? Is that something we're paying attention to as well, such that we don't have another country springing up on us and all of a sudden you realize that most of the countries in this region have the same challenge?
Thank you very much. I hope we have enough time. Let me try and be brief. I think, first of all, we had the coronavirus pandemic, which upset the global economy and was more devastating in its impact on the economy of developing countries. Added to that, we had, I would say, the removal of Colonel Gaddafi in Libya by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization created a very huge security vacuum. And if I just quickly remind our viewers, Mali, the same Mali that we're talking about, with regard to the situation in Niger right now, had a long-running civil war, pitting the Tuaregs in the north against the Africans in the south of Mali. And the Tuaregs had the support of Colonel Gaddafi for a long time. But eventually Gaddafi decided that the war should stop and that Mali should have a chance at peace. But some of those Tuareg groups refused to stop fighting. So Gaddafi took those that refused to stop fighting to Libya and put them in the Libyan army. And then I think from the regime of President Alpha Conare, peace returned to Mali. Now, when NATO invaded Libya and drove Colonel Gaddafi out, they allowed the Tuaregs in the Libyan army to return to Libya with all the weapons, because there was a no-fly zone in Libya, remember, and NATO was patrolling the skies, and it was all desert anyway. So the Tuaregs were able to go back to Mali with all the brand new weapons from Libya, and they overwhelmed the Malian army. And that was the very first coup that brought Captain Sanogo to power. They overthrew the government, and ECOWAS also tried. And that already created a very big destabilizing factor. Unfortunately, it spilled over to Burkina Faso, and the military in those two countries felt that the civilian administration were not doing enough to contain the rebellion. So they ended up having military coups. The case of Guinea was President Lansana Conte deciding to amend the constitution and go for a third term. And unfortunately, that also eventually led to a coup, and it was removed. So I think that we have had poor governance, the effect of the coronavirus pandemic, and the security vacuum in Libya. I think these are the three critical factors that have been largely responsible for what we are seeing in West Africa at the moment. Having said that, I do not think there's any justification for the coup in Niger. There is absolutely no justification for the coup in Niger. President Bazoum has just been elected. I mean, he's basically new in office. So what justifies a coup? So I feel that this could be the reasons why we are having these unconstitutional changes in power.
Well, it's a beginning of conversations, one might say, because the question Kade asked is quite significant, especially how it concerns Nigeria, given that Niger is a border country to Nigeria, and there are scares or fears in some quarters that should there be unrest that's lingering in Niger, the likelihood of people spilling into the country could be high, but we'll have to take that on some other time. Adebayo Oluwake, Global Affairs Analyst, thank you so much for your time and perspectives this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.